we're going to finish up chapter 19 today. We got to the very beginning of it. I just want to make a note where we're going. You see that chapters 19 and 21 of 2 Samuel relate to history. Then we get to chapters 22 and 23, and they are pretty much reflections on David's life. We have in chapter 22 a psalm that he wrote, which is essentially the same text as Psalm 18 to a great extent. And then in chapter 23 we have a section that's called David's Last Song, which was one of the last poems that he wrote, one of the last songs that he sang before he died. He doesn't die until we get over into 1 Kings, but we're getting close to the end of his life there. And then at the very end of 2 Samuel, we have this interesting account of the census that's taken. So I don't know how much of this we're going to get through today. There's obviously some very interesting, very important material in what we're going to cover. Now, last week, where did we leave off? We got to the end of Absalom's rebellion. And remind us, who was Absalom?
David's son.
David's son. We don't know that, he was like David's third son, we believe. The first son was killed, the second one isn't really spoken of, but Absalom steps up as if he's the heir apparent. And whether he was or wasn't, he sure acted like he was. He basically took over. And then Absalom comes to his rather ignominious end in chapter 18, where he's riding through the woods and his head get caught in the tree, and he winds up being killed by whom?
By David's
David's general, by Joab. Joab kills Absalom.
Joab killed him?
I believe that's what it says.
Yeah, he put the spear. Then his other men also finished him off. Yeah.
But Joab was right in the center of it, of course. And
He ordered it.
Before Absalom was killed, what instructions had David given about Absalom?
Deal gently with him.
He says, "Go gently with this young man, even though he really wants to kill me and he wants to kill all you guys." And of course, Joab in particular, all David's army think, "Are you kidding? Go gently with the guy who's trying to take over your kingdom." So they kill him. They have no remorse for that. But when word comes back to David that Absalom has been killed, what is David's response?
Mourns.
He weeps. It's just total mourning. And what's the reaction of all the people around him?
They are very disappointed in David for his actions.
Absolutely. Everybody around him, from Joab on down, is thinking, what is this? You'd have been, in fact, they say, Joab says, you'd have been happier if Absalom survived and all of us had been killed. All those who were loyal to you had been killed. And so, but Joab speaks some very profound words about David. And he says in verse 5 and 6, he says, "Then Joab came into the house of the king and said, 'Today you have covered with shame the faces of your servants, who have today saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and the lives of your wives and lives of your concubines, by loving those who hate you and by hating those who love you. For you have shown today that princes and servants are nothing to you. For I know this day that if Absalom were alive and all of us were dead today, then you would be pleased.'" Now, what a condemnation! But within that, as we discussed briefly last week, we see that something that is shown to be Christ-like about David, and it's really a foreshadowing of Christ, because David really doesn't hate those who have supported him. But he did indeed love Absalom. And so much so, he loved him that he mourned greatly over his death and for his loss. And so what is this showing here? This is showing that David is loving one who has rebelled against him and who does indeed hate him. Hate David. Absalom hates David and everything that he stands for. So what we see in that, of course, is something very Christ-like. That even though we have rebelled against Christ, we all stand in the shoes of Absalom. We have rebelled against God. We have revolted against his plan. And even though we should be revolting in his eyes, nevertheless, he loves us, and God mourns for every day of separation between us. And so, again, we see a very profound thing there.
Was that one of his younger sons, the youngest son?
Absalom? No, not his youngest son. It's the third in line. Third in line. Third.
Well, I was just wondering because I know that I was raised in a family of 8, and my youngest brother was the only person that my daddy ever bought a vehicle for.
There we are.
Softened up.
Yeah.
And we all,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah. There's a story like that in every family, right? About the favorite son or the favorite daughter, or, you know, you
Or the
treated,
baby.
that's right, or the baby, you know, you treated him or her different than you treated me.
Maybe they want
He did, and Daddy did treat him different
Yeah.
from all the others. And everybody just kind of like, what's
Let
going
me ask
on
let me
here?
ask you this, do you do things for your grandkids you didn't do for your kids? I mean, we soften up as
We
we
did.
do.
We did.
Yeah, but
maybe he just wanted to get him away from the house.
Yeah.
no, whenever he left, whenever we all left, my daddy was very happy. Whenever he left, he cried. He took him out of town and put him on a Greyhound bus to catch him to go to New Orleans.
Yeah.
And he cried when he left and everything.
Yeah.
And Mama told the story on me. He cried all the way back home. And all of us looked out. 18 years old, graduated, go.
In fact, he enlisted us in the army.
There you go.
There's more going on, some here.
There you go.
Yep, so the more things change, the more things stay the same. But anyway, we see here again, you know, that David's love for his rebellious son is a reflection of God's love for his rebellious children. He always wants us back, no matter how much we've rebelled and no matter how much we sin against him. Okay, so Absalom, the usurper, has been defeated, and starting in verse 8, we have the story of David's return to Jerusalem to reestablish his kingdom. Lon, you want to pick up there, chapter 19, verse 8?
Before you go on,
Sure.
tell me, Joab was his advisor,
He was more of his military, he's like his general.
all right, because he really listens to Joab, and Joab is very honest with him.
But I think it's because he controls the army. I think
Is
David
it?
is lost.
So did Joab know the Lord?
Well, you know, that's a very good question. There isn't any indication that Joab was in touch with God, but I was reading just this morning in chapter 24, which we'll get to maybe this week or next week, when David wants to take a census. You remember the story? So David wants to take a census, and he tells Joab, go take the census. And Joab says, I'll do anything you want to, King, but do you really want to do this? It's like Joab knew that it wasn't the right thing to do. So, you know, Joab...
Because he keeps giving him very good advice, like, you get out there and tell those soldiers you did so-and-so, you know, they did good, because right now you're not in such a good place.
But I think he knows if he loses his army,
Yeah.
I mean, he's just a figurehead. But later on, we're going to see what David really thought of him.
Yep.
But isn't Joab part of the family?
Yes.
He is, and I was wondering about that because I'm not sure who Joab's father was. I know he was one of
Had to be
David's
his brother,
brothers, but I'm wondering if Joab and David were possibly about the same age and could have been closer than nephew relationship, but more like a brother,
Yeah.
you know, because some of y'all know you've got brothers and sisters who had children at the same time your parents were still having children, so, you know, that relationship
Right.
can be very close sometimes,
I
even
wonder
though
if he was
it's...
scared of him. I mean,
I don't think he
well,
was
as we go
scared
into
of
the
it,
next couple
but
of
I think
things,
there was a great deal of respect.
because when we go into the next couple chapters or something, we're going to see that David understands how powerful Joab is, and he doesn't want to
Yeah.
test him.
Right. And look, Joab's cold-blooded, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we see it, you know, in chapter 20 where he murders Amasa because Amasa was going to be his rival. You know, so what does he do?
There, didn't he?
Yeah, he sure
So
did.
he's got two for sure.
Yeah.
Joab was the son of Zariah, David's half-sister,
Yeah.
Oh,
so he was
oh,
part
came
of
from his
that.
sister.
Yeah. Nephew.
Oh, his sister, okay.
Yeah.
Because his brothers, remember his brothers ridiculed him and,
Yeah.
and didn't think much of David when he was fighting Goliath.
Reminded you of Joseph.
Yeah, well, they thought he was just a kid, you know, and he was compared to them in age,
Right.
so.
And also, he was anointed the next king of Israel. So, you know,
Yeah.
there was a little jealousy there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, you know, Joab does what is expedient, like he killed Absalom. Why? Because that was the right thing to do, you know, to maintain David's kingdom. And then when Amasa is appointed, you know, to be the general in his place, what does Joab do? He goes and kills him, right? Because he doesn't believe that, well, number one, he's doing it for himself, but I think also Joab did it because he didn't believe that Amasa would be totally supportive of David.
Yeah, because he seems to have that trail of taking care of David to
Yeah.
some extent,
He
you
does.
know.
Well, Absalom and Joab were cousins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All in the family.
That's
Yeah.
right.
All right,
Yeah.
read on.
8.
8.
So the king got up and took his seat in the gateway. When the men were told the king is sitting in the gateway, they all came before him. Meanwhile, the Israelites have fled to their homes. Throughout the tribes of Israel, all the people were arguing among themselves, saying, "The king delivered us from the hand of our enemies. He is the one who rescued us from the hands of the Philistines. But now he has fled the country to escape from Absalom. And Absalom, who we anointed to rule over us, had died in battle. So why do you say nothing about bringing the king back?" King David sent this message to Zechariah and Abiathar the priest. "Ask the elders of Judah, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace, since what is being said throughout Israel has reached the king and his quarters? You are my relatives, my own flesh and blood, so why should you be the last to bring back the king?" And said to Amos, "Are you not my own flesh and blood? May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if you are not the commander of my army for the life in place of Joab."
All right, so there we see that Joab is going to be replaced by Amasa. And so in 20, chapter 20, we're going to see what happens to him. Read on.
He won over the hearts of the men of Judah so that they were all of one mind. They sent word to the king, "Return, you and all your men." Then the king returned and went as far as the Jordan. Now the men of Judah had come to Gilgal to come out and meet the king and to bring him across the Jordan.
All right, pause right there. So we know when David fled, first he fled to the Mount of Olives, right? And he was there for a while, but then he crossed over the Jordan, and he went across, and he was staying up. Let's see, I don't think we have it on the map here, but he's up like in this area east of the Jordan and sort of to the north of Jerusalem, right? And so what's happening? He's now summoned to come, and so he comes back, and he's on the east side of the Jordan River, and they're going to bring him back. Go ahead.
Now the men of Judah had come to Gilgal. I may have read that. Shimei, son of Gera, the Benjamite from Barum, hurried down with the men of Judah to meet King David. With him were 1,000 Benjamites, along with Ziba, the steward of Saul's household, and his 15 sons, and the 20 servants. They rushed to the Jordan where the king was. They crossed at the ford to take the king's household over and do whatever he wished. When Shimei, son of Zerah, crossed the Jordan, he fell prostrated before the king and said to him, "May the Lord not hold me guilty. Do you not remember how your servant did wrong on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem? May the king put it out of his mind."
All right, pause right there just a second. All right, so two guys come down to meet him. One is Shimei, and the other is Ziba. Who are those? Who are those two?
Sheba is the
Mephibosheth's servant.
yeah, servant, Saul's,
That's right.
he had the household. In fact, he told David that
Mephibosheth.
stay back.
That's right.
And was hoping that Absalom would take over. So he gave Mephibosheth all his property.
Yeah, gave Ziba all of
Yes.
Mephibosheth's
And then
property. That's
the
right.
other guy was one that was cursing and
That's
throwing
right.
dirt on
They're
David.
throwing dirt and rocks on him. That's
Yeah.
right. So these are the first two that run down and say, "Oh, we didn't really expect this to happen, but since it did, you know."
We're so sorry.
How about them tigers?
That's right. All right, read on. 19.
Okay, 19. I lost it somewhere.
We at 19?
Yep.
Okay.
For I, your servant, knew that I had sinned, but today I have come here as the first from the tribes of Joseph, to come down and meet my lord the king. Then Asman, son of Zerah, said, shouldn't Shimei be put to death for this? He cursed the Lord anointed. David replied, what does this have to do with you, you sons of Zerah? What right do you have to interfere? Should anyone be put to death in Israel today? Don't I know that today I am king over Israel? So the king said to Shimei, you shall not die. And the king promised him an oath.
Pause right there. Remember, this guy Shimei who cursed him, he's the last guy that David thought about when he died.
Yeah.
And then ultimately Shimei was put to death because of his sin. So the idea here is, again, a very Christ-like thing. Even though Shimei cursed David, David forgave him, and David didn't hold it against him at the time. Again, very Christ-like, that David, instead of retaliating for the curse, he did what Christ did. He became the curse so that the curse would not be visited upon us. But we see later on in his life that even though one may be forgiven, there is a temporal consequence to one's sin.
Kind of seems like David was cleaning his slate, wasn't he? I mean, he said he wasn't, but he was going to make sure
Yeah, that's
they
right.
paid.
He didn't forget.
He didn't forget.
That's right. All right, read on.
Mephibosheth, Saul's grandson, also went down to meet the king. He had not taken care of his feet or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day the king left until the day he returned safely. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, why didn't you go with me, Mephibosheth? He said, my lord the king, since I, your servant, am lame, I said, I will have my donkey saddled and will ride on it, so I can go with the king. But Ziba, my servant, betrayed me, and he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. The lord the king is like an angel of God, so do whatever you wish.
Pause right there just a second. Remember when Ziba came to David, he had 2 saddled donkeys.
Yeah.
And you can see here that what Mephibosheth says is that, all right, Ziba came to me, and like he had 2 saddled donkeys. I thought we were going to ride over to you together, but guess what? I was left behind, and Ziba takes off, and he comes over, and he wants to make his peace with you by telling lies about me. But interesting here, Mephibosheth, he says, David, do whatever is right in your eyes. In other words, he trusts David that, whatever, he says, you've been so good to me, you should have killed me, just like you killed, like the rest of Saul's household was killed, but you even let me eat at your table. So he extends great mercy on him, and Mephibosheth places great trust in David's judgment. So read on.
All my grandfather's descendants deserve nothing but death from my lord the king. But you gave your servant a place among those who eat at your table. So what right do I have to make any more appeals to the king? The king said to him, why say more? I order you and Ziba to divide the land.
Interesting there. What do you make of that?
He don't know who's telling the truth.
That's what it looked like to me. Or perhaps there was just so much that it didn't matter.
Yeah,
But, he should have done something to Ziba for his line, but
Yeah.
he didn't. All right, read on.
Mephibosheth said to the king, let him take everything now that my lord the king has returned home safely. Barzillai the Gilead also came down from Rolim to cross the Jordan with the king and to send him on his way from there. Now Barzillai was very old, 80 years of age. He had provided for the king during his stay in Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. The king said to Barzillai, cross over with me and stay with me in Jerusalem, and I will provide for you. But Barzillai answered the king, how many more years will I live, that I should go up to Jerusalem with the king? I am now 80 years old. Can I tell the difference between what is enjoyable and what is not? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Wow, that's encouraging as we get. It's coming, yeah. Can I still hear the voices of the male and the female singers? Why should your servant be an added burden to my lord, the king? Your servant will cross over the Jordan with the king for a short distance. But why should the king reward me in this way? Let your servant return, that I may die in my own town, near the tomb of my father and mother. But here is your servant Kimham. Let him cross over with my lord the king. Do for him whatever you wish. The king said, Kimham shall cross over with me, and I will do for him whatever you wish. And anything you desire from me, I will do for you. So all the people crossed the Jordan, and then the king crossed over. The king kissed Barzillai and bid him farewell, and Barzillai returned to his home.
All right, pause right there. So a lot of what Barzillai was telling the king was basically saying, look, king, I got my house. I just want to stay in the house. Don't make me move, you know. I'm old, so let me stay where I am. But nevertheless, we see that Barzillai, he was an old man, but he was a great man. He gave aid and comfort to David while he was on the run. But now they're parting, and so David crosses over. All right, keep on reading up.
Then the king crossed over to Gilgal. Kimham crossed with him. All the troops of Judah and half the troops of Israel had taken the king over. Soon all the men of Israel were coming to the king and saying to him, why did our brothers, the men of Judah, steal the king away and bring him in his house across the Jordan together with all his men? All of Judah answered the men of Israel, we did this because the king is closely related to us. Why are you angry about it? Have we eaten any of the king's provision? Have we taken anything for ourselves? Then the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, we have 10 shares in the king, so we have a much greater claim on David than you have. Why then do you treat us with contempt? Weren't we the first to speak of bringing back our king? But the men of Judah pressed their claims even more forcefully than the men of Israel.
What do you make of that last verse there?
10 shares.
The men of Israel answered the men of Judah and said, we have 10 parts in the king.
Now, it's the tribes, I guess. So is Israel the one that went with Absalom and Judah
Yes.
stayed with
That's
David?
right, yeah. So we see here at the beginning of the divided kingdom, you know, we're
Yes.
still in the United Kingdom. The kingdom doesn't become officially divided until after the death of Solomon, right? So we had the 10 tribes to the north and then the 2 tribes to the south. But we can see the beginning of the division was right here. The division really began with Absalom's revolt. And Absalom, he was basically the northern king of the 10 tribes, and the 2 other ones, Judah and Benjamin, were left over. And so these men they're playing politics here. In fact, you see for one of the first times the division between Israel, which was regarded as the north, and Judah, which was regarded as the south. Here, where Israel, the north is saying, we have 10 parts in the king. In other words, we got 10 tribes and we only have 2. So we ought to have
Is
greater
Israel
focus.
sometimes referred to as Ephraim?
That's a part
That's
of
the
it.
northern.
But I know it's a bigger
Yeah.
part of it, but
Yeah.
sometimes I hear the Bible say Ephraim, and I'm
Yeah,
thinking
and
they're
that's-
referring to the northern.
They are.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just wondering.
Because they divided as Ephraim and Judah.
Left Judah going north, the first place you came was to Ephraim.
Yeah,
And so
okay.
that's kind of referred
And it
to.
was a big part too.
It was a big
Yes.
part. It wasn't the whole of the
No, no.
north. Yeah, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just like, the reference sometimes is from Dan to Beersheba. Dan is the farthest north city, Beersheba is the farthest south city. Okay, so chapter 20, we see the beginning of another revolt. Even though Absalom's revolt has been put down, the controversy is still continuing. So Tommy, you want to read there in chapter 20?
I pass.
All right, Troy?
There had happened to be a rebel whose name was Sheba, the son of Barak and a Benjamite, and he blew a trumpet and said, we have no share in David, nor do we have inheritance in the son of Jesse, every man to his tents, O Israel. So every man of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba, the son of Barak, but the men of Judah from the Jordan as far as Jerusalem remained loyal to their king.
Pause right there. Now, again, we had the division. We had the 10 tribes to the north, and Judah, the other 2 tribes were Judah and Benjamin, right? And so now we see a revolt even rising up in the southern tribe with this Benjamite stepping up and saying, no, he's going to take a group of folks with him.
They must not have been, even though the revolt's over, there must be some really bad feelings yet because they
Yeah.
were easily persuaded. Huh?
Yeah. And one of the things we're going to see here, and it's relevant, is that in all of this rebellion, particularly the rebellion of Israel, we don't see any punishment that's levied for the followers of Absalom. Now, certainly Absalom dies, but Absalom wasn't the only one. He had, the scripture says he had captured the hearts of the men of Israel. So everybody was favoring, everybody that remained there in Jerusalem at least, was favoring Absalom over David, and they were glad David was gone. Shimei, he spoke the curse for himself, but he was really kind of speaking the curse for everybody who was on the west bank of the Jordan at that time. All right, read on, Troy.
Now David came to his house at Jerusalem, and the king took the 10 women, his concubines, whom he had left to keep the house, and put them in seclusion, and supported them, but did not go into them. So they were shut up to the day of their death, living in widowhood. And the king said to Amasa, assemble the men of Judah for me within 3 days, and be present here yourself.
All right, pause right there again. Who is Amasa?
He was
The
David's
new
commander.
general?
Yeah, we met him in the last chapter, verse 13. He's the guy, Amasa's the guy who's going to take over for Joab, right? So now David it's time for some military action, so he calls Amasa out. Okay, read on.
So Amasa went to assemble the men of Judah, but he delayed longer than the set time which David had appointed him. And David said to Bathsheba, now Sheba the son of Barak will do us more harm than Absalom. Take your Lord's servants and pursue him, lest he find for himself fortified cities and escape us.
All right, pause right there. So it says here in verse 5, the significance is Amasa went out to call the men of Judah, but he delayed longer than the set time which he had appointed him. So in other words, what's he doing?
Well, it's a good question though. I mean, is he stalling for the people to help the revolt, or does he not have
The support of
the support of the people that he can summon them? Because I think he only gave him 3 days, didn't he, or something like that?
3 days.
And so I'm saying, it's interesting, but obviously we know what Joab thought.
Right. So anyway, read on.
Is this other guy, Abishai, is that
Abishai.
Joab's brother?
Yeah,
Okay.
yep.
Wait, whose brother?
Joab.
Joab's brother, Abishai is...
There's 3 boys.
There's 3 boys. One of them's been killed already. Abishai is still around. He's the brother of Joab. They're all nephews. They're the sons of Zeruiah, David's sister. Remember? All right, read on.
So Joab's men with the Shirmahites, the Pelatites, and all the mighty men went out after him, and they went out of Jerusalem to pursue Sheba, the son of Barak. When they were at the large stone which is in Gideon, Amasa came before them. Now Joab was dressed in battle armor. Out of it was a belt with a sword fastened in its sheath at his hips, and he was going forward. It fell out. Then Joab said to Amasa, are you in heath with my brother? And Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. But Amasa did not notice the sword that was in Joab's hand, and he struck him with it in the stomach, and his entrails poured out on the ground. And he did not strike him again. Thus he died.
So it's interesting the way Joab's a pretty smart fellow, right? So he's got his military gear on, he's got his sword, and right before he comes to Amasa, his sword falls down. So what does he do? He leans over and he picks it up. So Amasa's not really thinking too much about it, and Joab grabs him by the beard like he's going to kiss him, and then he kills him right there.
Shame.
He didn't want to lose his job, did he?
Yeah, no.
Don't take his job from him.
Yeah, read on.
Then Joab and Abishai, his brother, pursued Sheba the son of Barak. Meanwhile, one of Joab's men stood near Amasa and said, whoever favors Joab and whoever is for David, follow Joab. But Amasa walloped in his blood in the middle of the highway, and when the men saw that all the people stood still, he moved Amasa from the highway to the field and threw a garment over him. When he saw that everyone who had came up from him halted. When he was removed from the highway, all the people went on after Joab to pursue Sheba, the son of Barak.
All right, so we see there that Joab took some rather decisive action rather quickly. He wasn't going to let this upstart take over his place. And again, we don't know if Amasa was going to be loyal to David or not. But Joab either thought he wasn't going to be loyal, or Joab wasn't too keen on Amasa taking over his role as the general. So he takes matters in his own hands. All right, verse 13. Joey, you want to start reading there?
No.
All right, Terry?
13?
Yep.
After Amasa had been removed from the road, all the men went on to Joab to pursue Sheba, son of Bichri. Sheba passed through all the tribes of Israel to Abel Beth Maachah and through the entire region of the Berites, who gathered together and followed him. All the troops with Joab came and besieged Sheba and Abel Beth Maachah. They built a siege ramp up to the city, and it stood against the outer fortifications. While they were battering the wall to bring it down, a wise woman called from the city, "Listen, listen, tell Joab to come here so I can speak to him." He went toward her and she asked, "Are you Joab?" "I am," he answered. She said, "Listen to what your servant has to say." "I am listening," he said. She continued, "Long ago they used to say, 'Get your answer at a bell,' and that settled it. We are the peaceful and faithful in Israel. You are trying to destroy a city that is a mother in Israel. Why do you want to swallow up the Lord's inheritance?" "Far be it from me," Joab replied. "Far be it from me to swallow up or destroy. That is not the case. A man named Sheba, son of Bichri, from the hill country of Ephraim, has lifted up his hand against the king, against David. Hand over this one man, and I will withdraw from the city." The woman said to Joab, "His head will be thrown to you from the wall." Then the woman went to all the people with her wise advice, and they cut off the head of Sheba, son of Bichri, and threw it to Joab. So he sounded the trumpet. His men dispersed from the city, each returning to his home. And Joab went back to the king in Jerusalem. Joab was over Israel's entire army. Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, was over the Kerethites and the Pelethites, and Adoram was in charge of forced labor. Jehoshaphat, son of Ahilud, was recorder. Sheba was secretary. Jacob, Zadok, and Abiathar were priests, and Ira the Jalrite was David's priest.
Okay, so we see that Sheba's revolt was put down rather handily, rather quickly, without a whole lot of bloodshed. All right, chapter 21, the revenge of the Gibeonites. Who wants to read there? Kim, you want to read?
Yes. During the reign of David, there was a famine for 3 successive years. So David sought the face of the Lord. The Lord said, "Is it on account of Saul and his bloodstained house? Is it because we put Gibeonites to death?"
Pause right there. So, what's going on? After the revolt is put down, there's a famine for 3 years. And at that time, it was thought that a famine was the result of what? Curse, God's wrath. And so David inquires of the Lord, says, "Why are you cursing us?" And the answer comes back, says, "It is for Saul and his bloody house, because he put the Gibeonites to death." Now, I don't know that we have the specific history, except that it's explained here that Saul evidently killed a bunch of Gibeonites. Now, who were the Gibeonites? You remember them? Where do we first meet the Gibeonites?
And Joshua,
Yep.
they were the ones who tricked them into letting them
Thinking they
leave,
were
and
far
then they
away.
were, that they had come from a distance, and so they allowed them to be their servants.
And
Right.
they gave them an oath
Yeah,
that they would.
Yeah.
that they
And
would
they made
protect
them
them.
like wood bearers or
Yeah.
something?
That's right. They carried the water and they carried the wood for the sacrifices.
sacrifices.
That's right. And so, yeah, so as Wanda said, what happened was Joshua, they had just been successful at Jericho. The Gibeonites, which is a town very close by to where they were, they said, uh-oh, we're going to be overrun. So what do? They put on their old clothes, they put moldy bread in their saddlebags, they act like they come from a long way, and they confront Joshua and said, you know, we come from a long way away. And so Joshua was tricked into making a covenant. What had the Lord told them?
Not to make any
Don't-
covenants with the people in that area.
That's right. But they did. Joshua was tricked. He made a covenant. And what the interesting thing is here is that evidently the Lord expected Israel to honor that covenant. Why? Because as a result of Saul's killing the Gibeonites, who were living in peace among them, a famine was sent on the land for the period of time. And again, what the Gibeonites, they became the servants of Israel. They're not part of the family, but they cut all the wood for the sacrifice. They brought all the water, which is a lot of water. And so that's what they did, and lived among Israel for a long period of time. So God is upset that Saul broke the covenant and killed some Gibeonites. So Kim, read on verse 2.
The king summoned the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were not a part of Israel, but were survivors of the Amorites. The Israelites had sworn to spare them, but Saul in his zeal for Israel and Judah had tried to annihilate them. David asked the Gibeonites, "What shall I do for you? How shall I make amends so that you will bless the Lord's inheritance?" The Gibeonites answered him, "We have no right to demand silver or gold from Saul or his family, nor do we have the right to put anyone in Israel to death. What do you want me to do for you?" David asked. They answered the king, "As for the man who destroyed us and plotted against us so that we have been decimated and have no place anywhere in Israel. Let 7 of his male descendants be given to us to be killed and exposed before the Lord at Gibeon of Saul, the Lord's chosen one." So the king said, "I will give them to you."
It's interesting here that so the Gibeonites come in and say, because of this terrible thing that's been done to us, we want you to give us 7 of the descendants of Saul, and we're going to go kill them. It's interesting, David said, "I'll do it," without ever inquiring of the Lord whether he should do it or not, but he does. All right, so read on.
The
7.
king spared Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the oath before the Lord between David and Jonathan, son of Saul. But the king took Amani and Mephibosheth, the 2 sons of Aiah's daughter of Rizpah, whom she had borne to Saul, together with the 5 sons of Saul's daughters, Merab, whom she had borne to Adriel, son of Barzil. He handed them over to the Gibeonites, who killed and exposed them on a hill before the Lord. All 7 of them fell together. They were put to death during the first days of the harvest, just as the barley harvest was beginning. Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, took sackcloth and spread it out for herself on a rock from the beginning of the harvest till the rain poured down from the heavens on the bodies. She did not let the birds of the air touch them by day or the wild animals by night. When David was told that Aiah's daughter Rizpah, Saul's concubine, had done, he went and took the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from the citizens of Jabal, Gilead. They had taken them secretly from the public square at Beth Shan, where the Philistines had come down after they had struck Saul down on Gilboa. David brought the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan from there, and the bones of those who had been killed and exposed were gathered up. They buried the bones of Saul and his son Jonathan in the tomb of Saul's father Kish at Zillah in Benjamin, and did everything the king commanded. After that, God answered prayer on behalf of the land. Once again, there was a battle between the Philistines and Israel. David went down with his men to fight against the Philistines, and he became exhausted. In Ishba-Benob, one of the descendants of Rapha, his bronze spearhead weighed 300 shekels, and he was armed with a new sword, and he would kill David.
All right, pause right here. So after the Gibeonites get their revenge, 7 sons of Saul, 7 relatives of Saul were killed. Their bodies lay out for about 5 months, and then their bones are gathered up together with the bones of Saul and the bones of Jonathan, and they're buried. And after that, it's like there's peace in the land. But then war comes up again. So the Philistines are waging war, and what we have in these last few chapters, last few verses, chapter 21, are accounts where it appears that 4 sons of Goliath come to challenge the army of Israel. And they're called out by name, but it appears that these were 4 guys about the size of Goliath. And remember, we have several accounts in the scriptures about these giants appearing in the land. What's the first reference to the giants coming about?
The spies.
No, even before that, right? That's one account. When the 10 tribes went over, well, I mean, when the spies went over and they saw the giants in the land, they were there then. But even before that, in Genesis, remember, it says when
The daughters of Cain.
It says, that's right. It says when I think what it's talking about is the angels.
Yeah.
Those who I think would have been in league with Satan. Says the union between those supernatural beings and the daughters of men produced these giants in the land. And they were called the Rephidim, I believe. And of course, they would have perished in the flood, but they appear again. And they're seen in the promised land. They appear in the form of Goliath, and now they appear again. And this, I believe, is one of the last appearances of these giants. But it is said that these giants came about as a result of Satan's plan to corrupt the lineage of Christ. Okay, and that's why we see the fateful battle between David and Goliath, because if Goliath would have won, that would have cut off the lineage of Christ.
Let me ask you that now. Did David actually marry one of Saul's daughters?
Yes.
And did she stay with him, or did?
No.
So I'm just saying,
They were back and forth
this
and
lady
back and
isn't the
forth.
one that the daughters.
No.
Okay, that's why I was
No.
wondering.
Remember, he married Michal, and Michal was the one who made fun of him when he was dancing
Yeah.
before the
Now
ark,
Saul's
and she was cursed as a result of that. And
She was barren.
she was barren the rest of her
Okay.
life because of that.
Michal,
Yeah.
yeah.
Michal, M-I-C-H-A-L, I think is how her name was spelled. Okay, so Nancy, you want to pick up there and read about the fight with these 4 giants?
But Abishai, son of Zeruiah, came to his aid and attacked the Philistine and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, "You shall not go out with us to battle any longer, so that you do not quench the lamp of Israel." After this, a battle took place with the Philistines at Gob, with Sibbecai the Hushathite killed Zoph, who was one of the descendants of the giants. Then there was another battle with the Philistines at Gob, and Elhanan, son of Jer-oregim, the Bethlehemite, killed Goliath the Gittite, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam.
This is like Goliath Jr. here, right?
Okay, it's the brother of.
Go ahead.
There was again war at Goth, where there was a man of great size who had 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot, 24 in number. He too was descended from the giants. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of David's brother Shimei, killed him. These 4 were descended from the giants of Gath. They fell by the hands of David and his servants.
Okay. So again, this is, oh, Jack is calling time on us. So here we are, the descendants of the giant who were the functionaries of Satan who rise up to destroy David once again are defeated at plague time. Okay, next time we're going to finish 2 Samuel, and so we're going to read the Psalm of Deliverance. You can see there's some rather profound things in chapter 22. And in particular, what I want to talk about is what David says in chapter 2, verses 21 through 25. He's reflecting on his life. He says, "Therefore the Lord has recompensed me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands in his sight." Wow, what a bold thing for him to say.